This is a bit of a surprise. I'm going to be introducing Adika. Um, Adika Butler is an author, photographer, philosopher, and creative consultant. He's a culinary artist, a world traveler, and a student of life science. He served his community and worldwide readership with gratuitous offerings in the form of ebooks and his renowned blog, Mindglow Media, that can be found at thirdimax.net. He's a published author of Treasures of Darkness and Dahomey and Modern Dahomey. A black man, a black American travels through the land of Wudun. So you know that's. It takes time, courage, and commitment to amass a unique, well researched, cultivated perspective. His works are the way he knows how to love you. Conspiring to make you more of you, Adika is a fountain of wisdom, compassion, knowledge, and grace. It has been a whole pleasure to watch him come to conclusions, piece together aspects of his knowledge, complete field work, and unearth his presentation today. Ladies and gentlemen, babas and mamas, sisters and brothers, I present to you Adika Butler, the Empress Clothes, the meta psychology behind high fashion.
All right, right. Thank you very much. We ready to rock, man. This has been a this this has been a long journey for me because I remember like 20, 21 years ago, sitting in the seats that you all are placed in right now, like watching Phil Valentine, Bobby Hemmett, Layla Africa, so many people, even Brother Dawood, Asir Duka Tears, A.A. Rashid. And I was always excited and like just amazed by the information that brothers were dropping and how they took the time to study and read and research, and they were able to internalize everything that they learned, whether it was through life experiences or through books, magazines, journals, and they made it their own. And I remember one of the biggest things that was so significant about that experience was the fact that I would be going to work the following morning and I would feel so energized. You know what I mean? I didn't feel depleted. I didn't feel like I got a bunch of like bad news that was just designed to like scare me out of my existence. I felt empowered. I felt dignified. I felt noble. You know what I mean? And it inspired me to continue with my own research. I pretty much grew up in a Pan-African household. Both of my parents are Rastafarian, but it was a very interesting upbringing in the sense that I was exposed to different schools of thought. You know what I mean? My dad would play Farrakhan tapes in the background, like when we were in the house doing our thing. Of course, I grew up with the reggae music. And, my dad, when he was driving me to school in the morning, he would tell me stories about the Moors in Italy and stuff like that. So I've always had this in my background. And then, as far as my reading experience goes, because this is writer's block, I pretty much started out with like comic books. Rom the Space Knight was like one of my favorites, and then I got into Spider-Man. And I really got excited about reading wrestling magazines, believe it or not. Like it helped me to cultivate my vocabulary, express myself in ways that, used to surprise my teachers, talking about going back to like 5th grade, 6th grade. And yeah, this has been a long journey, and I'm just so excited that I'm able to stand in front of all of you today. I mean, you all represent the most dynamic, the most powerful that our people have to offer, the world, you know what I mean? And just the ability to just share what I've learned for the topic at hand today, the Emperor's Clothes, the meta psychology behind fashion, behind high fashion. I wanted to talk about this because I know that, as a people, we like to get fly, we like to present ourselves in a very powerful and dynamic way. You got Red Pill right there in the audience, he got his cloth. And, it's something that goes without saying that we value looking good. And I wanted to like talk about it in a way where we probably haven't really thought about it, or we might have thought about fashion in this way, but for whatever reason, we may not have felt validated in our own thoughts. So by me pointing out certain things, it might bring certain things together for you today, and then maybe even like tomorrow, and whatever you do, whether it's going to work, going to school, whatever it is that you do, you might take, more pride into how you present yourself and have that dignity and that self-esteem. And, it goes a long way because it also affects how people respond and treat you. You know what I mean? If you looking dusty, people treat you a certain way, and when you take time to put yourself together, put on nice perfume, cologne, whatever it is, it definitely impacts your reality. So I want to definitely speak to that. So we're going to get this started formally. I just want to start with a little tidbit right here. Attention-seeking behavior versus authentic self-expression. While both may seem as bold, provocative, and even ostentatious, one is a projection of one's internal wealth and vision, while the other reflects a desire to secure the gaze of others in the absence of an internal substance and depth. The path you choose is up to you. You can take this how you will. So the inspiration behind this lecture presentation is a children's book by Hans Christian Andersen called The Emperor's New Clothes. And the moral of the story is essentially is that we should avoid self-delusion via flattery and speak the truth about what we see even when it feels uncomfortable or inconvenient in doing so. But seeing the nakedness of another may very well be a virtue. And that last line is what I'm adding to this conversation. How? We'll discover that as this presentation progresses. So you are all on the receiving end of magnanimous gifts beyond your wildest imagination, both directly and through your descendants, your children, your grandchildren, people who are coming after you that you may not even know anything about. But before we inherit the gifts that are to come to us, we have to look at what has been taken from us. And we're going to start with that. But be rest assured that what we have to gain is like what's been taken from us is nothing compared to what we have to gain. But we're going to take a look first at some of the things that have been taken from us, and being more aware of that, it magnifies the truth of our own value as a people. So in order for a vampire to suck your blood without any pushback from you, they have to plant the seed of thought in your mind that whatever you create with your hands and whatever comes out of your mind is intrinsically primitive, useless, and flat out inferior. However, knowing that you are a living amalgamation of talented, creative, and highly skilled ancestors gives you a sense of inner knowing that this world revolves around your cultural innovations, which you seek to own. The Black American origin of blue denims. How many of you are aware of this? All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about this. So I begin with a quote by Rosie Lesso, who is an art historian, in an essay entitled Blue Gold, published on the Thread blog on February 27th of last year. She wrote, and I quote, "Like India, West Africa also has a long history of indigo production. Steeped in tradition, the ancient craft of creating indigo cloths had been passed from one generation to the next, from growing and harvesting to fermentation and dyeing. Indigo cloths and garments are deeply embedded with spiritual symbolism and ethos that still persists in many West African cultures." And then we go from there to Seth Rockman, who is a professor at Brown University, which is one of the Ivy League universities of this nation. He says, and I quote, Many African captives who have become enslaved in the New World brought with them knowledge of how to extract the blue from the plant and how to fix the blue to fabrics. Indigo is one of the ways in which slaveholding became tied to the economic fortunes of the colonial experiment in the Americas. Coming from black people of the Americas. Everybody around the world wears denim jeans right now. You even have what people call the Canadian tuxedo I was recently told about, which is essentially you wear denim jeans with a denim, jacket. It's just a new name for a very old concept that we're all very familiar with. But it's ironic that it's called a Canadian tuxedo when it originates with black people of the Americas. So you see all of these iconic figures, iconic in the sense of the influence and impact that they've had across the world. You see they're all wearing denim jeans. You have the iconic album cover by Bruce Springsteen, Madonna, Justin Timberlake, and Britney Spears. And you have James Dean in his iconic image wearing the denim jeans, and you have Princess Diana wearing what people now today call a Canadian tuxedo. But what do we have down here? It says, in early colonial America, denim was the apparel of black American prisoners of war identified as slaves. If you go to a website called Freedom on the Move, which has an extensive archive of runaway slave prisoner ads, denim fabrics are referred to specifically as Negro cloth. So initially, these clothes that people of all nationalities, of all ethnic groups wear today all across the globe, it was specifically identified as Negro cloth at one time. But it just goes to show when a certain group of people are wearing garments, it becomes something that everybody wants to wear, even though those people are constantly told that they're nobodies, that their lives don't have any real meaning and any real use other than to be used by others for their own wants and needs. Back in 2019, we see that the denim jeans market had an evaluation of $64.8 billion. In the next 5 years, it's expected to almost double to $119 billion worldwide. That's a big jump, very significant. And it starts with these people who are identified as slaves wearing their Negro cloth. So it's become a phenomenon that's taken over the globe. The originators and the takers. If you notice right here, this is a photo of a Cameroonian woman from 1908 or 1909 in the Museum of Berlin. If you notice the design in the fabric at the very top here, it's taken by Versace. It's the same pattern. Originators and takers. Quelle mask out of Gabon in West Africa. You see the star right here, 1, 2, 3, 4. They got it in the LV monogram, right there in your face. And one of the biggest ones, Louis Vuitton, taken from the Maasai, same fabric. And, of course, these clothes are selling for thousands of dollars. A lot of the people who they're stealing these ideas and concepts from cannot even afford it, but it's taken from them nonetheless. Before the rapper Ye started running around with the black conical hat, I wrote an article on my Substack page showing and proving that Ku Klux Klan regalia is actually a bunch of imagery stolen from foundational black America, West Africans, and the medieval Moorish aesthetic. White fragility posing as white supremacy is so bankrupt in creativity that it blatantly steals elements of culture from the people it proclaims superiority over. This is beyond pathetic. I wrote the name of my Substack article is called The Ku Klux Kente Concept, and the subtitle is Ku Klux Klan Regalia is an amalgamation of imagery culled from the Black experience. And I wrote this back in 2023, which was way before Kanye West was even running around with, his little outfit here. Maybe he read my article, maybe he didn't. Sarah Bartman and the Woman's Bustle, an entire Victorian era fashion trend, was birthed by a South African woman who was paraded across Europe as a circus attraction. So you see this like mobile bakery here, they try to incorporate that by making the bustle in these dresses. How many of you are familiar with the story of Sarah Bartman? Okay, so I talked about what was taken from us, and now I'm going to get into the metapsychology of high fashion, which is what we really want to get into today. So fashion is generally defined, mundanely defined, as the way that a culture or civilization dresses and behaves within a given space and time. Hence, what is considered fashionable changes over time. These changes may reflect shifts in popular culture, politics, climate, and economics. So a lot of the fashion that was popular back in the 80s, although we kind of are in like this retro period where everything goes now, but a lot of the fashion that was popular in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it may not particularly, some elements of it may not be popular today. That's because, things change with time. Fashion is something that is very fluid, and it changes based upon the tastes of the people who just, come to an understanding amongst themselves that, hey, like we're going to do something different at this time. But when you get into a more metaphysical definition of fashion, I would say that it is an artful simulation of geometrized auric fields as an intentional mode of creative self-expression, psychological warfare, or hypnotic enchantment. Now, these are the three levels of fashion: creative self-expression, psychological warfare, and hypnotic enchantment. Now, what are some examples of this? We're going to get into that right now. Fashion as creative self-expression. In the late 80s and 90s, black youth popularized extremely baggy clothes to bring pride and dignity to unfavorable economic circumstances. Projected confidence hides shame. How many people ever seen the TV program Little Rascals? Okay, so you might remember like when they had that TV show, like all of the characters, the black and the white characters, they most of them had baggy clothes on because the show was pretty much a sitcom like describing like the goings on during the Great Depression, when a lot of people, they didn't have access to food and clothing like they did during the Roaring 20s when, everybody had more money. So Big brother might have passed down his clothes to his little brother. Big sister passed down her clothes to little sister. And that's how that fashion trend became a thing. And then back in the early 30s, when things started to get a little bit more stabilized, you had the zoot suit, where they had the baggy pants. Of course, a lot more flair to it, but it was still the same concept. So back in the early 80s and even into the 90s, you had similar economic circumstances, although not as dire, but harsh economic stances nonetheless, where a lot of people in urban America, all across America, they didn't have access to the type of money that they would have access to by the time you get to the 90s. And, it's said that it was a very booming time in the economy during President Clinton's first administration. But during the early 80s or even like late 70s, during the Carter administration, a lot of people were suffering hardships. It was the same situation as the Depression in the sense that big brother hands his clothes down to little brother, and it became a baggy look. But instead of it being something of shame, whereas oh, I didn't have enough money, I didn't have this, I didn't have that. People made it into a fashion style, and it became something that the whole world wanted to emulate. Even people who had millions of dollars in their bank account, they started to emulate what was started by young black people in urban America. Fashion as psychological warfare. Wars are won in the mind before a gun is drawn or a sword is pulled. The Japanese samurai wore fearsome masks to invoke an ominous sense of awe and submission in their adversaries. So you look at this samurai mask right here. You see he got the black face, he got the broad nose, looking, real dark. How many of you have ever heard the samurai saying that in order for you to be a great, brave samurai, you need at least a drop of black blood? Yeah, okay, so this is a visual representation of that. And when I was doing research on this particular subject, I found Japan has a very interesting culture in the sense that their creation story very much mirrors the creation story of the Dogon, where they talk about the 8 Nomo, and the ancient Kemetic Anu priesthood, where they talk about the 8 divinities. And in ancient Japan, among the Ainu people who occupied Japan in its antiquity, they have a story of 8 gods that rise out of the primordial waters to bring forth creation, which is very interesting because when you have this story in ancient Kemet, that priesthood is called the Anu priesthood. And in Japan, you have the Ainu people. Is there a connection there? I wouldn't doubt it. Fashion as hypnotic enchantment. Dressing in royal fabrics and adorning yourself in truck jewels projects an image that inspires awe. If you can inspire a sense of mystery and majesty in those who see you, then you don't have to work as hard through speech or brute force to have the people you rule submit to your will. Your very image plants the seed of thought in their minds that they should yield. This is a form of silent, magical enchantment. So you see the sister here. When I first saw this, I thought it was like Rita Marley, but it's interesting because Rita is very prominent in Ghana right now, and these images come out of a Ghanaian context. So you got to see the guy with the jewels right here. So it's pretty much elaborating on this concept. Now we're about to enter into the Moorish dimension of things. This is a great book that I don't really hear people talk about, but I highly recommend it if you want to look at the Moorish paradigm from a fashion standpoint. This book is called Exotic Nation, Morophilia and the Construction of Early Modern Spain by Barbara Fuchs. In her book, Exotic Nation, UCLA professor Barbara Fuchs talks about Morophilia, which is the European fear of all things Moorish. Within that, there was a paradoxical admiration for Moorish aesthetics in literature, architecture, and fashion. Some of the Moorish innovations in medieval and Renaissance fashion include the woman's clog shoe, as well as tall cylindrical and cone-shaped hats. While many Moorish-style clothing was outlawed throughout Europe, it was still enjoyed by aristocrats during parties and masquerades, where the royal courts would stun on each other by showing off who had the best Moorish-style outfits. This book also gets into how when you had the Reconquista is when, the white Spaniards were taking ownership back of Spain. They were pushing the Moors out. And during that process, during the 1500s, 1600s, a lot of Moors were literally forced out of their homes to go back to North Africa. And what a lot of people would do is they would take their linen fabrics, their clothes, all of their, major drip, and they would sell it in bazaars. So you could kind of say that the thrift shop was initially conceptualized from Moors in Europe being forced out of their homes and driven back to Africa. And a lot of them were also taken as prisoners of war to places like Haiti, Jamaica, Barbados, And yeah, that's a whole nother story in and of itself. I'll go into that at another time. Another great book, The Black Prince of Florence, The Spectacular Life and Treacherous World of Alessandro de' Medici. Historian Catherine Fletcher wrote this excellent book on the life of Alessandro de' Medici, which has great information on the masquerade culture when European aristocrats took pride in Moorish and even Turkish styles of dress. Alessandro was a luminary within that cultural expression of fashion. So whenever they had these grand balls, these grand masquerades, you know, he was that nigga. You know what I mean? He was the one that they was looking like, oh man, I wish I wore what he wore. You know what I mean? But yeah, his half brother was very jealous of him and actually got him killed. Yeah, that's another story for another day. Fashion and Masculinity in Renaissance Florence. This is a good book by Elizabeth Curie. In Renaissance Italy, fashion became more of a focus for young men of Florence who had access to material resources, yet were kept out of key positions of political and economic power. The same can be said about the positions of Florentine women of all ages. Those who were politically castrated and blocked from influencing public policy used the art of the cloth to become notable figures in their social circles. Young Southern Italian men were ridiculed by Florentines for their baggy, ostentatious clothing. The women were said to drop more bread on clothes than on their own home furnishing. Does this sound familiar? Does this sound familiar? The Low-Life Crew of Brooklyn. How many people have ever heard of them? Yeah, yeah. So I remember like back when I first started hearing about them when I was in like junior high school, particularly like around like Flatbush Avenue. Like I used to always hear like they all know how to dance and they all wear polo. And yeah, that was a gang that was really prominent in Brooklyn, and they were known for boosting and all of that. And I'll get into it here. So as black youth of 90s New York City, we were criticized by our elders for being designer brand centric. However, we came of age in a time when we were excluded from the political process that shaped our lives and made into political scapegoats, with no other available mediums of self-expression but the clothes on our backs, which many youth stole from the purveyors of capitalism without a conscience. The main difference between the youth of Renaissance Florence, Italy, and the black youth of 90s New York City was the fact that it was never intended that we'd be fully integrated into American society in the prime of our adulthood. We were intended to be the expendables. So we were doing the same thing that people who were subjected to the same circumstances were doing, but the difference between us and them is that when they got to be 25, 30, they were allowed to be, you know, integrated into the society, whereas, you know, it was intended for us to be, you know, behind bars. Black dandyism, a philosophical approach to fashion that involves radical expressions of personal style as a form of protest against white social norms. Living big, being bold in the face of racial marginalization is championed and highly celebrated, as it should be. What happened? What happened? The anti-Black Wall Street playbook involved in the systematic devaluing of black clothing brands. So I remember when I was like, you know, coming up in like junior high, high school, you know, the black clothing brands were all the rave. That's what we all wanted to own. We wanted to have the Carl Kanai. I remember I had the black Carl Kanai jeans with the metal buckle on the back pocket. That was a big deal. When Wu-Tang dropped Wu Wear, that was a big deal. Cross colors, even before that. FUBU, and you have April Walker, a woman, a black Mexican woman, who was very prominent in New York, and she was pushing the envelope with fashion. And these were the brands that we all wanted to wear. You know, people who are of, you know, black urban hip hop culture, we wanted to like just immerse ourselves in what they were doing. And we saw what they were doing as significant, and it was more significant than what anybody else was doing. And somewhere down the line, we fell for the Black Wall Street playbook. And what I mean by that is this notion that white ice is colder than black ice. A lot of times when people talk about Black Wall Street, we talk about how it was bombed and it was burnt down, and that's the end of it. The truth of the matter, though, is that it was built back up. How it was actually destroyed was people started promoting integration, and through the promotion of integration, they started like advocating going to European businesses instead of shopping with their own and patronizing the businesses that were in Oklahoma as they had been doing, which, it was great. They had their own movie theaters, their own dry cleaners. Everything that they did was beautiful. It was sleek. It was everything that you could describe that was positive. But somebody convinced them that what they were doing wasn't good enough and that they need to go to another group of people to get that. And that's exactly what, hip-hop culture started doing. That's part of, the hip-hop era, which my brother Black Dot is going to speak about very soon. People started to promote other brands that didn't give a damn about hip-hop culture, and they made it cool. And, some of these people who did that, they're in a lot of hot water right now. It's very ironic. It's very ironic. So Hermes became the thing, Versace, Bottega, Gucci, Salvatore Ferragamo. These are the replacement thrillers pushed by corporate rap music. So we got away from the hip-hop culture that was promoting clothes for us, by us, not just literally, but figuratively. And they started promoting these brands, which, are 100 years old, 75 years old, and they weren't even thinking about us. They wouldn't even piss on us if we were on fire. But we started promoting their brands through the music and making them even more wealthy. The global star power of Dapper Dan. What did I see when I went to Benin and Turkey? So I went to Turkey, for a little bit, and then I went to Benin. This was all in like one trip, pretty much. And it's very interesting because these two cultures, they don't really have much they don't coincide that much. But I saw the same thing in both countries, which made me wonder, this must be a global thing. And what I saw was in Turkey, I saw some of the dopest knockoff Gucci clothes that you could ever imagine. But the thing that all of these different pieces had in common was the fact that they all had the name Dapper Dan emblazoned on it. So it wasn't just knockoff Gucci clothes, it was knockoff Gucci clothes with Dapper Dan's name. That means, and when I saw this in Turkey, I went to the oldest continuous known bazaar on the planet. I can't remember the name of it, but it's in Turkey. They've been around since the 1400s, early 1400s, when the Moors were still in Spain. Like, this bazaar is that old. And when I went to that spot in Istanbul, they had knockoff Dapper Dan clothes. I lost, the pictures, but they looked great, and it made me think, these people didn't want Gucci clothes. They wanted Dapper Dan. When I went to Benin, the clothes weren't as great, but same thing. All of the knockoff Gucci clothes I saw had Dapper Dan emblazoned on it. So in their eyes, that means that Dapper Dan has more value than the Gucci brand itself. And he gives it credibility as opposed to the other way around. They want you to think that they made him. No, he made them. Slaves to Fashion, Black Dandyism and the Styling of Black Diasporic Identity by Monica L. Miller. Very good book. I didn't get a chance to finish it, but I did get a chance to get some gems out of it. This book serves as the ideological foundation for this year's Met Gala, theme supposedly celebrating black men who made distinct fashion a big part of their personal culture and lifestyle. The fashion industry has fed off of the artistry and star power of Ye, Virgil Abloh, Pharrell, Pusha T, and A$AP Rocky, just to name a few, who have kept the old European fashion houses relevant from 2010 until the pandemic. Since the pandemic, most black people aren't wrapped up in those European luxury fashion brands. It's not because we can't afford it. It's because validating Gucci, Hermes, Versace, Louis Vuitton, and Bottega are no longer a priority for many of us. This new badge of honor is showcasing grassroots clothing lines pushed by independent artists with their own flair and vision. The Met Gala theme is an attempt to reel Black American youth back into the culture of validating wealthy legacy brands who leverage our cosigns into social capital. While this may not seem like much, it is an indication of a spiritual transformation taking place in the youth who are prioritizing their third eye over the glare of designer sunglasses. So when I pass by, thank you. So when I pass by a lot of these stores, I don't see any black people in these stores anymore. I used to, but most of the time when I see people in there shopping, they're usually almost always Middle Eastern or Asian. Like, we're not in those stores anymore because we're not on that. We off that now. The Paradigm Shift of 17th Century Men's Fashion in England. This is another great book. The Three-Piece Suit and Modern Masculinity by David Kuchta. The general public started to see the extravagant dress of the royal families and royal court as signifiers of political and moral corruption. They were dressing like the black aristocracies of an older Europe, but they weren't giving anything back to the people who served them. They were just flaunting their wealth in the people's faces as if to say, my life as a boss is wonderful, while you're just a miserable worker. Does this sound familiar? Aren't a lot of our so-called like big corporate rappers doing the same thing? Isn't the sales of like rap music going down in a lot of respects, and the energy that it once had is not as dynamic because it's not as considered, even though it still is amongst many underground artists and artists that, you know, just have that hip-hop spirit in their soul. A lot of these corporate rappers, like, people are turning their backs on them and moving into like other genres of music because they're not of the people anymore. They're of these corporations, and the people sense it. Whereas before they were blinded, the people see like, you don't give a fuck about me, so we're gonna find something else to do. After averaging an annual revenue of $1 billion between 2012 and 2019, that's a long swath of time. That's almost the better part of a decade. The Crocs shoe has recorded annual revenue of at least $4 billion since the global pandemic. This little simple shoe right here, I remember when I was in culinary school, we used to like to wear these Crocs because they were really comfortable on your feet, and we would be on our feet sometimes doing externships, working in 4 or 5-star restaurants, and you can stand on your feet for like 10 to 15 hours in these, you know what I mean? But now people are wearing it as fashion. People are wearing it as, they don't care about wearing $300-400 sneakers as they did back in 2010, 2007. They're wearing what they deem as comfortable for them, and that's what the culture is at now. Fashion can be reimagined as a medium for transmitting the themes from classical black cultures in modern times. A theatrical performance is an artistic means of transmitting ideas and concepts to an audience. Artful transmission is performance. So what are we to make of carefully curated pieces of wearable art encoded with images that point us to ancient universal principles and cultural archetypes? A crewneck sweater designed by a well-cultured designer can become a quantum lecture that immediately transmits inspiring information to the viewer through the performance of fashion. So fashion isn't just something where you just put on something that looks nice and it has nice colors, it has nice texture. It can be a conversation piece. Somebody might be like, "Oh, where did you get that?" "Oh, this is Mansa Musa," and it becomes a whole conversation. So this is a mini lecture right here. You're looking at it as just like a dope piece of clothing, but this is a mini lecture. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Carrying on tradition, teaching via art and design. So we gotta like give props to the people in our community who have continued in that tradition of doing the quantum lectures through fashion and design. You got Farana Corp, you got my brother A.A. Rashid with Ghetto Telepathy, and Red Pill through Mart 25, 125. He got the Bobby Hemmett shirts out there. Um, it's very important that we understand that there's many different ways of conveying this ancient knowledge that we all value. Not all of us is going to be, writing books. Not all of us are going to be doing lectures, but we can all do our part in what we do, whether you're a dancer, whether you're a fashion designer, whether you make uh, clothing, whatever you do, dancing, anything, like culinary arts. You have a role to play within the promulgation of this culture. And you're just as significant, even if you're not, center stage, so to speak, dropping the jewels. So the following Akan images are from the Moose Online collection. And I want to like get into like, just some imagery that just gives you perspective on how people incorporate who they are into their fashion. And it might give us some ideas of how we can continue to do that today as we move forward. So these crowns with solid gold plates that look like books are the headdresses of the royal scholars. The men who wear them are the historians and cultural custodians of their people. So this is all a Ghanaian drip right here. Like they got the hats on and it looks like they got books and that's just another way to honor them. This Royal Akan headband is one of multiple abutire. This particular one protects the wearer from the effects of malicious sorcery. So that's what these symbols are for right here. It's supposed to protect the chief from anybody who want to do sorcery on him. This version right here, which might be more familiar to a lot of you, this royal headband with the star and crescent moon represents the evening star Venus. The planet is associated with a feminine expression of divinity, although it is worn by men. And that led me into something because when I learned about the meaning behind this particular headband, I remember that a lot, if not all of the Roman emperors, they were said to be the sons of the goddess Venus, which I thought, like that's kind of interesting. And then I was watching the Gladiator 2 movie in theaters, and I was like, wait a minute, there's something going on here. And I was noticing the similarities in the drip these Roman emperors wore. And by the way, you may have already like heard this through articles and thought pieces that were on these. These two guys, Gaeta and Caracalla, they existed in real life, and they were the mulatto sons of a real black emperor known as Septimus Severus. But in this movie here, they're shown as, white guys. But I thought that the clothing that they had on, at least to me, it looked very West African. Similarities in ancient Roman and traditional West African styles of dress. This is called, I believe, an asoke, similar to what Baba Okunle was wearing early on. I guess he's out there. It's ironic that there are multiple West African languages where the words can only be written accurately by using the Latin alphabet. Interesting. Is there a connection? We'll address that maybe another time. From royal garments of the past to exalted crowns of the future, we are all spiders weaving the web of a new collective reality. Spiritual redemption through a new garment. The man and the woman of the future is one who is able to translate the ancestral energies coursing through their blood into crypto geometries and color resonances that others can feel to the extent that they also identify with that energy. This will be the capstone on the pyramid when we talk about the death of celebrity and the rise of the real. So you see this self-realized man and self-realized woman with their ancestors behind them coming into their own power, coming into their own being, coming into who they truly are. That for centuries, for years, nobody has ever seen. But the culmination of everything that they are is going to become more apparent and become more valued and more seen as we all continue to evolve. Because this is a journey for all of us. Like, none of us are who we're going to be. We're all in the process of becoming. The fabric of space-time. If space can be linked to a fabric that all of the celestial bodies in the cosmos are embedded in, then who is wearing God's garment? Who will model the cloak of divinity on the runways of multidimensional convergence? The cloth talk of tomorrow will be felt and not seen or heard. Coordinated threads will no longer be needed to speak on our behalf because our modes of self-projection and expression will be so strong, so complete, so all-encompassing that we can finally be seen for who we are in our naked truths, which extend beyond our temporary apparel. This is the inheritance. And we're already seeing this on so many levels, like so many young people. I see they're walking around with T-shirts and Croc shoes. Like, they're not as caught up in like the designer brand culture that my generation, people who are in their like mid to late 40s, even 50s, were caught up in when they were younger. And one of the reasons why I think that is because it goes back to what I was talking about earlier with Florence, Italy, and the whole culture around the low lives, in 80s, 90s, Brooklyn, New York. And that is the reality, is that we didn't have many means of expressing ourselves. So many of the young people today have multiple platforms that they can express themselves on. You have social media, you have YouTube, you have podcasts that you can, start and talk about whatever you like. And you can be more popular or just as popular as, the mainstream media platforms. So this is really, we talk about a lot of the things that we don't like about our present reality, but there's a lot of beauty in the fact that we have the ability to express ourselves to the extent that we can. And for our children and grandchildren, they're going to take it as a given. They're not going to know a lot of the hardships that we had and how we weren't able to express ourselves in a certain way. And they're going to take it as a given that they can self-publish books that look, excellent. Like it can be in a Barnes & Noble all on their own. They're going to take that as their ground floor. And it's very important that we recognize, the evolution is taking place and the blessings that we have in front of us in that regard. Nice clothes mean nothing until a real one wears them. See my wife? This is some articles of clothing I was doing when I was doing my Mind Glow Garb journey. My business partners, Desmond and Asante, who are probably watching this in Mexico via live stream, they were my business partners in putting some of these garments together. And, we had a blast, but, we weren't really well versed in the clothing industry and how it works, but we had fun doing it while we did it. And, we might bring it back at a later time. And, I just wanted to share some of the imagery here. This St. Maurice joint is, definitely one of my favorites. And the Sufi cream. I mean, I love all of them. And these are some of my classic books. The Treasures of Darkness, Living Jews for Spiritual Resurrection. And my most recent book, The Homie and Modern the Homie, which my wife referenced, A Black American's Travels Through the Land of Vodun. So this first book, this was my first one, and it was a long time coming. Classic book. So many people loved it, which was what I intended. It was a long time in the making. I started writing this back in 2011, and I didn't release it until 2017. I remember I was at Nicholas Brooklyn one day. I think this was maybe in like 2014, and Black Dot was there, and he was saying, "Yo, Adika, come on, man, stop playing. You got to drop this book." And I was like, it's coming, it's coming. And, it took me another 3 years before I completed it, because where I was at the time was I was evolving so fast. Everything that I wrote was like fire, but it was like I was outgrowing what I was writing at such a rapid pace that I was feeling like some of the material, although if you read it right now, you would be impressed by it. Like, you would be like, damn, you didn't put this in the book? It just didn't represent who I was at the time when I was ready to publish. So I probably published maybe half of what I actually wrote, and that became The Treasures of Darkness. And it pretty much is me speaking on the different schools of thought that made me who I am right now. You know what I mean? Like, I talk about, the Rastafarian dimension, the Moorish dimension, West African-based spirituality, all of these different things, and I give them their own place. And it was really a dynamic book, lyrically written. I remember a few friends of mine who got familiar with my writing. They would read it and they would ask me, like, "Yo, do you spit bars? Like, do you rhyme?" And I was like, "Nah, that's not really my talent that I've found as of yet." But it was interesting that they all thought that I did because of my style of writing. And, I really had a lot of fun with that book. And then I came with this book, which was a more personal work. Like, if this was, if Treasures of Darkness was written, this was my Illmatic, I would say. Yeah, it was very personal, very vulnerable. I talked about things that I was very vulnerable about before I started writing it. And I said, nah, I'm just going to like tell my story, and it'll inspire people to tell their own story. And it involved my trip to Benin, what I learned, how it transformed me. For those of you who don't know, Benin is the source of what we call Vodun science. And although the Haitian Vodun is what most of us are more familiar with, Haitian Vodun is more of an amalgamation of what comes out of Benin, Dahomey, and the Congo. And also, the Oyo Empire in Nigeria as well. But this was about my journey speaking to the adepts, the spiritual, the priests who were in Benin, and it was a crazy story. It was a great story, and the people who got it, love it, and it's also considered a classic. So my website where you can find my books. This one is sold out, but I'm working on my third book, which is going to be a masterpiece. It's going to be a masterpiece. I would say, like, at this point, it's probably going to be a cross between these two books here in terms of the vibe, the energy. One of the things that I take pride in is the fact that none of my books are alike. These two books couldn't be more different. And my third book is going to be more of the same. And that's probably going to be dropping sometime next year. And I also have a short film that I worked on with my brother Chris. Chris, I know you're probably watching this. Yeah, that's going to be a short film that's going to drop next year. We filmed it in Colombia, and I think people are going to be pleasantly surprised by what we were able to capture and the artistry involved in the visuals. And it's going to be powerful and be filled with a lot of great music. So That's what's to come. And for the time being, I highly, highly recommend, like, I can't stress this enough, the Indivisible College on Substack. These are just some of the pieces that I've written up on my Substack. I literally have at this point hundreds of articles. I believe that some of my Instagram posts are better than some people's lectures. And it's just a fact, it's what it is. These articles go even more in depth, and they're just very creative, they're very dynamic, and I have an ability to cross-reference history, pop culture, and a lot of other things in a way that few people can. And I highly encourage you to subscribe to my Substack. It is a platform where a lot of writers are going to, like, post and write their articles. There's a lot of people who are on there right now, such as Rick Rubin, Ava DuVernay, and a lot of other people, like people who are like writers. If you want to like get your ideas out to people who appreciate good writing and like to read, Substack is definitely something for you to consider. And with that, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your appreciation. And this was a great first experience, one of many to come.
Of many. My brother. Okay. The brother killed that, man. All right.